Ladies and gentlemen, imagine a small, beautiful thing that promises power. A whisper in the night, a shortcut, a secret that seems to answer every lonely wish. At first it feels like a gift, easy, intoxicating, almost irresistible. That is how dark magic begins in stories and in life, as a quick fix for fear, pain, pride or desire. But the cost is never what we were told. What looks like power at the start slowly turns your world into a house of mirrors, where the reflections are distorted versions of the person you used to be. Every dark path begins with something deceptively harmless, a moment of curiosity, a fleeting desire for control, or an innocent attempt to fix what feels broken inside. Dark magic rarely announces itself as evil. Instead, it often presents as a solution. It might come through a charm, a ritual, a whispered promise, or even a symbolic temptation in our modern lives, like manipulation, deceit, or addiction. The initial act feels empowering, giving an illusion of mastery over one's problems. But beneath that surface lies a subtle shift, a tiny crack in one's moral compass that slowly widens as time goes on. What starts as a single choice soon begins to weave invisible threads of influence around one's thoughts and emotions. In its early stages, dark magic feeds on curiosity and emotion. It appeals to the vulnerable parts of the human spirit. The desire to be noticed, the hunger for power, the longing for revenge, or the fear of weakness. The first few experiences seem harmless, even exhilarating. You tell yourself that you're in control, that you can stop any time, that it's just a small thing. But that's exactly how it grows. Through repetition and denial. Each time you give in, the boundary between just this once and one more time blurs. What was once a decision becomes a reflex. The mind learns to crave the feeling of control it once felt, unaware that the control has already begun to slip away. The danger lies not in the grand gestures of darkness, but in the small compromises we make every day. A single dishonest word, a quiet act of envy, or a hidden resentment can become the soil where darker intentions take root. These small decisions seem trivial in the moment, but collectively they create a pattern, one that starts to define who you are and how you think. As these choices accumulate, you find yourself moving further away from the light, often without realizing. The subtlety of dark magic's influence is what makes it so dangerous. It doesn't destroy suddenly. It corrodes slowly, like rust eating through the foundation of metal that once seemed strong. As time passes, the effects compound. The person who once acted out of curiosity or pain begins to rely on that darkness for validation and comfort. The sense of empowerment that once felt freeing now becomes a dependency. You start to justify actions that once would have repulsed you, convincing yourself that your reasons are noble or necessary. But the truth is simpler and far more tragic. What began as a whisper now speaks louder than your conscience. And by the time you realize it, the roots have already sunk deep, feeding on your emotions, shaping your thoughts, and quietly turning your choices against you. One of the most dangerous aspects of dark magic, or any form of destructive influence, is its ability to separate you from the world around you. Isolation doesn't happen overnight. It starts subtly, often disguised as independence or secrecy. You begin by keeping small things to yourself, thinking no one would understand or that others might judge you. That small secret soon grows into a wall between you and the people who truly care. The magic or the darkness behind it thrives on this division. It convinces you that you're better off alone, that no one could possibly grasp the depth of your experience. This illusion of solitude feels empowering at first, but it is the first step toward dependency on something that doesn't love you back. As the influence deepens, relationships start to weaken. Conversations become shorter, trust begins to erode, and you find yourself avoiding eye contact with those who might see through the facade. The comfort of companionship slowly fades, replaced by the cold reassurance of your secret power. Friends who once offered warmth and honesty begin to feel like obstacles or intruders. The voice of the dark influence feeds on this growing divide, whispering that isolation is safety, that the world outside cannot be trusted. Soon, the distance between you and others becomes more than emotional. It becomes spiritual. You begin to lose the sense of belonging that once anchored you to reality. The more isolated you become, the stronger the darkness grows. Without the presence of others to ground your perspective, you start believing your own distorted thoughts. The echo chamber of your mind amplifies fear, guilt, and anger until they sound like truth. You may convince yourself that people are against you, that no one could possibly understand, or that connection itself is dangerous. This psychological isolation creates a breeding ground for manipulation, whether from dark forces, toxic influences, or your own inner shadows. Without the balance of outside voices, your inner world becomes a labyrinth of confusion where logic is replaced by paranoia and loneliness. And yet, isolation does more than silence others. It silences your own conscience. The longer you remain disconnected, the easier it becomes to ignore the quiet warnings within you. Without love, empathy, or accountability, you start to accept darkness as normal. The friendships and family ties that once gave you strength are replaced by a hollow dependence on something that only drains you. The whispers that once sounded like guidance now echo in emptiness. And you begin to forget how it feels to be seen, heard, and understood. In that silence, the power of dark magic reaches its peak, because nothing strengthens darkness more than a soul left entirely alone. The most insidious part of dark magic's grip is how it steals your sense of control without you even realizing it. At first, every decision seems intentional. You tell yourself you're simply exploring, experimenting, or managing your situation. You believe you're the one commanding the power, shaping outcomes, and making choices on your own terms. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, the direction begins to reverse. What was once a tool in your hand becomes a chain around your wrist. The dark influence begins to guide your thoughts, shaping your desires and dictating your actions. You no longer act because you choose to. You act because something within compels you. This slow erosion of free will is subtle but absolute. A quiet theft that leaves you believing you're still in control long after your control is gone. Each small compromise adds another link to the invisible chain. The first few times, you justify it, telling yourself it's necessary, harmless, or temporary. But every justification is a surrender. You begin to depend on the feeling of power, the comfort of illusion, the deceptive calm that the dark force provides. Eventually, it's no longer a choice but a craving. Your mind begins to rationalize actions you would have once condemned, and your moral compass spins without direction. You stop questioning whether what you're doing is right or wrong, focusing instead on how to sustain that fleeting sense of strength or control. And in that moment, you are no longer the master of your choices. You have become their servant. As the loss of agency deepens, it infiltrates every part of your life. You find yourself acting on impulses that feel foreign, as though your thoughts are not entirely your own. The dark influence manipulates emotions, turning fear into anger, guilt into defiance, sadness into withdrawal. You might start to notice that your decisions are increasingly driven by compulsion rather than clarity. You promise yourself that you'll stop after just one more time, but each attempt to quit feels harder than the last. The mind becomes a battlefield, and you can no longer distinguish where your own voice ends and where the darkness begins. This confusion is exactly how dark magic maintains control, by convincing you that resistance is pointless. Over time, you stop trusting yourself. The constant battle between your conscience and your compulsion drains your spirit. You begin to feel like a passenger in your own life, watching as your actions cause harm you can no longer prevent. The people around you may see the change, the distant gaze, the defensiveness, the unpredictability, but their concern only feels like an attack. And the more you try to reclaim your will, the tighter the grip becomes. The loss of agency is not just about surrendering control to darkness, it's about losing faith in your own strength to choose differently. Once that faith is gone, The darkness no longer needs to fight. It simply waits, knowing you will act in its favor, believing all along that you're still free. When dark magic or any form of destructive influence enters a person's life, it rarely confines itself to the individual alone. Its reach extends outward, touching everyone connected to that person, especially those who care the most. At first, the damage to relationships is subtle. Missed conversations, forgotten promises, and moments of emotional distance that seem harmless in isolation. You might tell yourself you're simply distracted or preoccupied, unaware that these small cracks are signs of something deeper. The people around you begin to sense a change. A shadow in your tone, a secrecy in your actions, a barrier that wasn't there before. What once was open communication becomes guarded, and the warmth that held relationships together starts to cool. As the darkness deepens, deception becomes a survival mechanism. You start hiding parts of yourself, concealing the truth, or reshaping stories to avoid confrontation. Lies, even small ones, become easier to tell because the alternative, being exposed, feels unbearable. The dark influence feeds on these lies, using them as fuel to separate you further from others. Every secret kept is another step away from the trust that once defined your connection. Soon, honesty feels dangerous and distance feels safe. Those who notice your change may question you, but instead of seeing their concern as love, you perceive it as intrusion or judgment. This misunderstanding widens the gap until even the closest bonds begin to fray. This damage doesn't stop at trust. It infects empathy. Under the spell of darkness, compassion often fades into indifference, and understanding is replaced by defensiveness. The relationships that once brought you joy now feel burdensome because they demand vulnerability, something the darkness forbids. Friends who offer advice are dismissed as naive. Loved ones who express worry are pushed away. The dark influence convinces you that you're better off without them, that their love is weakness and that solitude is strength. But in truth, it's isolating you from the very network that could save you. The emotional distance you create becomes both a shield and a prison, keeping pain at bay but also preventing healing from ever reaching you. In time, the consequences of this separation manifest as broken trust, resentment, and silence. The relationships that once grounded your identity begin to wither under the weight of unspoken pain and misunderstanding. People who once believed in you may grow wary, unsure how to reach the person you become. You might see the disappointment in their eyes or feel their absence more deeply than you expected. But by then, the damage often feels irreversible. The laughter, support, and connection that once surrounded you are replaced by emptiness. A haunting reminder of how darkness doesn't just destroy the self, but everything connected to it. The corruption of one's moral foundation is one of the most devastating consequences of dark magic's influence. It doesn't happen suddenly with an obvious act of evil. It unfolds slowly, almost imperceptibly, as small compromises accumulate. The mind begins to rationalize the unacceptable, shaping excuses to justify actions that once felt wrong. It begins with bending the truth, breaking a promise, or crossing a minor line, just this one. Over time, those small choices become patterns, and patterns evolve into character. The person who once upheld certain values starts to redefine them to fit new desires, or to ease the guilt that lingers after each misdeed. The heart becomes numb, and what once caused discomfort now feels ordinary, even necessary. As the darkness seeps deeper, it reshapes the way you perceive right and wrong. The whispers of conscience that once guided your decisions grow faint under the weight of temptation and justification. The line between integrity and deceit blurs, and soon you begin to convince yourself that morality itself is a limitation, a weakness to overcome rather than a compass to follow. You might start believing that everyone is selfish, that honesty is naive, and that kindness is a trap. These distorted beliefs serve as armor, protecting you from guilt, but simultaneously eroding your humanity. The more you act from this corrupted mindset, the more your actions reflect the very darkness you once thought you control. Eventually, moral corrosion transforms into a way of life. You no longer question your motives. Instead, you measure everything in terms of personal gain, power, or survival. Relationships become transactions. Truth becomes flexible, and empathy feels like a burden. The darkness rewards these traits by giving you the illusion of strength and superiority, but it's only feeding on your detachment. The moments that should evoke remorse or compassion instead bring satisfaction or indifference. In this stage, your moral compass isn't just broken, it's inverted. You start to admire what you once feared and mock what you once respected. That quiet inner voice that used to warn you grows silent, leaving you to navigate life guided only by appetite and impulse. And yet, the irony is cruel. The more you surrender your values, the emptier the victory becomes. The world may see you as confident or powerful, but internally you feel a hollowness that no achievement can fill. The loss of morality is not merely an ethical downfall, it's a spiritual decay. A quiet death of the part of you that once loved truth and light. The things that once gave life meaning, honesty, compassion, faith, integrity, begin to feel foreign, almost foolish. In their place stands a version of yourself, shaped by darkness, driven by desires that never satisfy and choices that slowly erase the person you used to be. When dark magic or any consuming negative influence takes hold of a person, the effects go far beyond the mind and spirit. They begin to manifest in the body and in everyday life. The stress of maintaining secrets, the guilt of deception, and the constant emotional turmoil take a toll on physical health. Sleep becomes restless, the appetite fades or swings widely, and the body feels drained even without physical exertion. Anxiety settles into the chest like a weight, and the nervous system remains on constant alert. Over time, this chronic strain weakens the immune system, disrupts hormones, and dulls mental clarity. The body reflects the state of the soul, and when darkness consumes the spirit, the body inevitably follows, wearing the burden of every hidden choice. The mind suffers most in silence. Fear, guilt, and paranoia become constant companions, circling the edges of every thought. When you live under the shadow of dark influence, the mind begins to distort reality, convincing you that danger lurks everywhere or that escape is impossible. This creates a vicious cycle. Stress feeds the darkness, and the darkness feeds the stress. Mental health begins to deteriorate. Depression deepens, anxiety sharpens, and the ability to think clearly fades. Even small tasks feel overwhelming, and hope starts to wither. The world no longer feels safe or welcoming, and instead of reaching out for help, you retreat further inward, hiding from the very people who could pull you back into balance. The practical consequences soon follow. Reaching into every aspect of daily life, relationships suffer first, then work, finances, and personal goals. You begin to miss opportunities, lose focus, or push away those who care about you. The more chaos grows inside, the more it spills outward. Productivity declines, responsibilities slip through your fingers, and mistakes multiply. Bills may go unpaid, friendships may dissolve, and trust, once easily given, becomes rare. The darkness feeds on disorder, and every lost connection or failed responsibility tightens its hold. It convinces you that you're incapable, that redemption is pointless, and that your world is collapsing by your own hand. The more you believe this, the deeper you sink into despair. And as time moves on, the cumulative damage becomes undeniable. The physical exhaustion merges with emotional emptiness, creating a life that feels drained of purpose and direction. The health you once took for granted begins to falter. The spark of joy that once lit your days dims into a faint glow. Friends might comment on how different you look or how distant you've become, but you can't quite explain the heaviness that has settled over you. Every day feels like an echo of the one before, defined by fatigue, regret, and confusion. The darkness doesn't just weaken your body or mind. It corrodes your ability to live fully, quietly stealing the energy and stability that once gave your life meaning. Escaping the grasp of dark magic or any consuming darkness cannot be done through denial or silence. The first step toward recovery is acknowledgement, the courage to face what has taken root within you. It takes immense strength to admit that something has gone wrong, that you have allowed a force to influence your choices and emotions. This honesty, though painful, is the beginning of light. The truth acts like a crack in the wall of darkness, letting in a glimmer of hope. But acknowledgement alone is not enough. It must be followed by action. The darkness will resist, whispering that you're too far gone, that redemption is impossible. But each small act of truth, each confession, each step toward help weakens its grip. True recovery begins with a decision to stop hiding and to start healing. Life does not only mean goodness, it means connection, honesty, and vulnerability. Reaching out to others, friends, family, mentors, or spiritual guides creates a lifeline that darkness cannot sever easily. The isolation that once fueled your downfall begins to fade when you allow yourself to be seen again. Sharing your story, even in fragments, transforms shame into strength. The act of speaking breaks the silence that the darkness thrives on. Each conversation rebuilds a sense of belonging, reminding you that you are not alone and that healing is not a solitary path. It's through human connection, compassion, and accountability that the heart learns to trust again, and through trust it begins to mend the fractures within the soul. Yet, recovery is not immediate. It is a slow, often painful process. The habits formed in darkness do not vanish overnight. They linger, tempting you to return to what is familiar. There will be moments of weakness where you may stumble or question your progress. But light grows through consistency, not perfection. Small, steady acts, seeking counseling, practicing mindfulness, rebuilding broken relationships are what strengthen the spirit over time. Every positive choice, no matter how minor, reclaims a piece of your identity that darkness once tried to erase. Gradually, the voice of hope becomes louder than the echo of temptation. Healing requires patience, persistence, and faith that even the smallest light can overcome the deepest shadow. The action towards recovery also demands forgiveness, not just from others, but from yourself. Many people trapped in darkness carry a heavy burden of guilt, believing they are unworthy of redemption. But clinging to guilt keeps the darkness alive. True healing involves letting go of self-hatred and understanding that pain can become wisdom. Forgiving yourself doesn't erase the past, but it transforms it into a foundation for growth. The scars remain, but they serve as reminders of what you survived and how far you've come. Recovery through light and action isn't about becoming who you were before. It's about becoming someone stronger, wiser, and more deeply connected to truth than ever before. In the end, the greatest weapon against dark magic is not more power, it is awareness, love, and the willingness to face the truth. Darkness feeds on silence, secrecy, and fear, but it withers when exposed to honesty and compassion. Every person who chooses light becomes a beacon for others still lost in the shadows, proving that no matter how deep the darkness runs, it can never truly extinguish the human spirit. The journey back may be slow, filled with pain and self-discovery, but it leads to something far more powerful than any forbidden stream: inner peace. And when you finally stand in the light again, you realize that the power you sought in darkness was within you all along, waiting to be awakened by courage, forgiveness, and the will to begin again.